There's nothing quite like the game of football to turn the most skeptical mind into a believer in something beyond our understanding, the supernatural. Even those that aren't superstitious have likely found themselves thinking at one point or another, is my team cursed? Well, today will be part one of a series where I attempt to answer that question by telling the long, storied history of NFL curses, going through as many as I can, sharing their lore, as well as ranking the validity of them, ranging from the not a real curse tier to the God hates your ass tier. Now, going into this, I knew the NFL had a rich history of curses, but this was quite a deep rabbit hole to venture down. As such, I've decided to break this into what I think will be a 3-part series. So if there's a particular curse that I didn't mention today, chances are that it will be in a later part, so stay tuned for that. But today we'll cover some of the most well-known, as well as some of my favorites. So with that, let's begin. We'll start off with perhaps the most well-known curse in recent times. It's the Madden Curse. The legend is that the player who finds himself featured on the cover of the video game will experience misfortune the subsequent season, either through an extreme decline in play, suffering a potentially major injury, or something even worse. The Madden Curse is infamous for a reason. It can be quite vicious, especially in its heyday. It started off strong. Running back Garrison Hurst was chosen to be the face of Madden 99. The following year, Hurst actually improved his numbers, exploding for over 2,000 yards from scrimmage and playing well in the 49ers wildcard win. However, it seems the curse was merely toying with him, as on the first play from scrimmage in the divisional round of the playoffs, Hurst suffered a gruesome ankle injury that would unfortunately run into more complications, leading to him missing the next 2 seasons. The following year featured the great Barry Sanders on the cover, and right before the season started, he chose to retire, still in his prime. My theory is that he knew he was dealing with 2 curses now, because the Lions themselves were also cursed. We'll talk about that. So he wisely decided to retire from football before the season began. It did technically claim his career, as he never played again, but he at least avoided major injury or something else. I can only imagine the double whammy he avoided. Over the years, the curse has hit players in different ways, but it doesn't always take effect. Going from 2001 onwards, Eddie George is next. A star running back for the Titans, George might be our first exception to the curse. He was fine that year, although he did get the ball stripped from him by Ray Lewis in the playoffs, which directly led to the Titans losing. After that, he would deal with injuries and take a step back in efficiency, but was still reliable, never missing a game until his final season. The curse may have worn him down, or just being an NFL running back may have done so. Dante Culpepper had his breakout campaign as a second-year quarterback for the Vikings. Unfortunately, the rising star would suffer setback after setback, declining significantly in production the following year, as well as nursing a knee injury. It would be a few years before Culpepper would achieve the heights of his potential again, and even then, it was short-lived. Marshall Faulk, who was in the latter half of his career, but also seemingly still in his prime, would deal with nagging injuries and for the first time, fail to achieve 1,000 yards rushing, which he would never achieve again. Michael Vick, perhaps the greatest player in the history of the video game, followed up his cover-winning season with a broken leg the day after release, missing 11 games that year, although he would have much bigger problems a few years later. Despite breaking his wrist, Ray Lewis would only miss 1 game, and although it was his first season without recording an interception, it seems he was able to overcome the curse. Donovan McNabb would miss 7 games with injury after gracing the cover, as well as be embroiled in an infamous public feud with wide receiver Terrell Owens. McNabb and the Eagles declined significantly after reaching the Super Bowl the year before. After an insane 2005 MVP season, Shaun Alexander would suffer an injury the following one, and never truly recover, being out of the league just a couple seasons later. This is one of the most notable instances of the curse. After a promising Rookie of the Year season, Vince Young's career would take a sharp nosedive. Between controversies, injuries, poor mental health, and poor decision-making, Young's once bright future as a pro instead transpired into a dark, cautionary tale. Madden 09 featured a recently retired Brett Favre. However, right before its release, he came out of retirement to play for the New York Jets. The season started off strong. Favre threw 6 touchdowns in Week 4, but the second half of the season would be a disastrous finish to an overall disappointing comeback campaign. This would also be the year when Favre sent pics of his pecker to Jen Sturger. Madden 2010 would feature 2 players on the cover, 2 of my all-time favorites, and Larry Fitzgerald and Troy Polamalu. Polamalu may have gotten hit, as he missed all but 5 games that season with a knee injury, but Larry seems to have gotten the best of the curse, having another Pro Bowl year. Up until this point, the Madden Curse has been quite effective, hitting more often than not. However, it's now where we begin to see its power begin to wane. Drew Brees is next, and is another that seems to have beaten the curse, although he would throw a career-high 22 interceptions, and the Saints' playoff run would end abruptly with the legendary Beastquake, but we'll save that for later. Peyton Hillis is one of the more random players to grace the cover, as his career turned out to be a one-year wonder. Following his breakout campaign, Hillis would sit out games, seeking a new contract, and deal with injuries and illness. The Browns let him go, and soon the whole league did as well. Next would be Calvin Johnson, who seems to have gotten the better of the curse, although like his Lions Madden cover counterpart, Barry Sanders, Megatron would retire in his prime, just a few years removed from his Madden appearance. Another NFC North great would be the next cover athlete, Adrian Peterson. That season he would decline, somewhat, rushing for 800 less yards. But to be fair, he had 2,000 yards rushing the year before, so it wasn't exactly a bad year. However, the following season would be catastrophic, as AD was accused of violently beating his son and suspended all but 1 game. Despite playing for many more years after that, the incident has certainly tarnished much of Peterson's legacy. Next up, Richard Sherman, who also seems to have gotten the better of the curse. Although this would also be the year where the Seahawks lost the Super Bowl in dramatic fashion, something they never seemed to really recover from, so I suppose you could attribute that to the curse. After him is Odell Beckham Jr., who followed up his Madden appearance with another solid season. But after that, OBJ suffered a slow and steady decline to his career. Rob Gronkowski would miss the majority of the season, including the entire Patriots playoff run, which did include a Super Bowl victory, so perhaps a silver lining there. We then saw back-to-back Patriots on the cover, as 2018 would feature Tom Brady. Brady laughed at the curse as he put up an MVP season, although the Patriots would come up short in the Super Bowl that year against Nick Foles and the Eagles. Perhaps no player was more greatly affected by the curse than Antonio Brown. AB had a fine season that year, but it would be his last full season, as by the end of it, he was voicing his displeasure with the team. His downward spiral is too long to include, even for this video, but yeah, he was never quite the same. Patrick Mahomes would be next, and it's at this point where the curse seems to have lost much of its power. Yeah, he missed 2 games that year with an injury, but he won his first Super Bowl. Following that, Lamar Jackson's numbers took a bit of a dip, but he seems to have avoided the curse as well. After that, it was Mahomes and Brady on the cover, and both had great seasons, although neither did make the Super Bowl, so maybe something there. The next Madden featured the late, great John Madden, so no curse potential that year. And the one after that was Josh Allen, who had another great season, but came up short again in the playoffs, although I think that might just be a Bills thing. The most recent cover player is Christian McCaffrey, and we'll see if the curse takes effect or not. Hopefully not, as I have him in fantasy. Well, this didn't age well. CMC's in Germany and hasn't played a snap this year after coming down with Achilles tendonitis right before the Week 1 kickoff. At least, I drafted Puka Nacua with my next pick. The Madden Curse got off to a pretty strong start, being downright lethal at times, but many players have since been able to avoid it entirely, and that seems to be the case, in recent years especially, as it has definitely lost some power. One theory is that the curse hit Antonio Brown so hard that it broke the curse, as it has no remaining power. My theory is that the curse still exists, but it's a weakening one, being directly linked to the state of the actual game, with Madden being a worse and worse release each year. Like the game, the curse is a joke at this point. Should Madden return to form and actually be good, I'd be concerned for that year's player, but as it stands now, I think the Madden Curse is easily broken. Another famous and often seen curse is the announcer Jinx.
Do not talk to me about an announcer's jinx. Michael Badgley has not missed a kick all year, field goal or PAT.
Then I won't say.
Even talk about it. 29 yards.
About it.
Here's Badgley's kick.
Oh, my gosh.
No.
Now this jinx doesn't only apply to kickers, we've seen it affect the likes of quarterbacks and other positions as well, and it isn't always the announcers doing the dirty work. A good old-fashioned graphic can do the trick as well. One example is this Joe Burrow game, when he was on a streak of 200 consecutive passes without an interception.
Throws intercepted! It is picked off, and on the run is Roquan Smith!
The announcers would then jinx him not only a second time,
he's not afraid to miss any shots. He's not afraid to throw the next interception. He's ready to rock.
Play action. Good blitz pick up by Mixon, and it's intercepted!
but a third time as well.
Bengals' last 3 possessions all have ended in turnovers. Back-to-back picks as Burrow will throw on first down. Pressure up the middle. He's hit it. It's a third straight pick!
Perhaps the most infamous example, though, is the Gary Anderson missed kick in the 1998 NFC Championship.
Anderson hasn't missed in 2 years. That's a pretty good bet if you say, do you think Gary Anderson will make this field goal? The answer should probably be yes.
39 yards away, and it's not good.
Now, I don't think it would be correct to say this jinx led to the modern-day curse of the Vikings franchise. They've got underlying demons, but I would say it has potentially cursed the kicker position. Under the right conditions, the announcer's jinx can be catastrophic, occurring in the most inopportune time and derailing a career or ending a season. It doesn't always take effect, and it isn't always so severe, but since it can happen to any good, consistent player, growing only stronger the more consistent they are, and places them at the mercy of the commentators, the graphics, and even the media in some cases, I would say it can be a tough one to beat. Ah, the MVP curse, a classic. So here's how it goes. The league MVP will not win the Super Bowl. Should the player who wins MVP make it to the Super Bowl, his team is destined to lose. Now for a while this one was quite strong. From 2001 onwards, it claimed the likes of Kurt Warner, Rich Gannon, Sean Alexander, Tom Brady twice, Peyton Manning, Cam Newton, and Matt Ryan, who we'll talk about later. All of these guys won MVP, but lost the Super Bowl the same year. Now who else but Patrick Mahomes to break the curse in 2022, winning both the MVP and the Super Bowl 23 years after the curse began. Now it's hard to say how the future of the MVP curse will look and whether or not it still exists. It is a more recent curse too, only starting in 2001, so I think it was riding something of a hot streak that is now over and easily beaten. Now this is a curse. The curse of the Pottsville Maroons. Who are the Pottsville Maroons, you ask? Well, my boy, you're talking about one of the oldest franchises in NFL history. A century ago, the NFL consisted of many teams that have long since been defunct. One of those was the Maroons, who played in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, the same city famous for Yingling, a true American beer. The Maroons were an independent team that had operated since 1920, and then they were in a short-lived minor league for a year. But in 1925, they joined the still very primitive National Football League, and in that 1925 season, the Pottsville Maroons were dominant and easily the best team in the league, with their final game being a win against the Chicago Cardinals. Yes, that's the Cardinals. The Maroons finished with a 10-2 record, and since the NFL championship was automatically awarded to the team with the best record, it seemed guaranteed that Pottsville would be taking home the chip. However, what instead would follow would be one of the most controversial moments in early NFL lore. You see, while the scheduled season was technically over, the championship had yet to be awarded. There was an open window where, if they liked, teams could still schedule more games for a few more weeks in order to bring in more revenue or pad their record, and that's what a lot of them did. Now, since Pottsville had been the best team, they also earned the right to host the Notre Dame All-Stars, which was seen as a huge opportunity, as college football was actually more prestigious than professional football at this point. This Fighting Irish team also had the famed Four Horsemen. However, a game this big needed a more sizable stadium than the high school one Pottsville played in, so they instead would schedule to play it at a larger stadium in nearby Philadelphia. There was a problem with this though. Philadelphia was the territory territory of another NFL franchise, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, who are the predecessors to the Eagles. Now, the Yellow Jacks were not having this. They felt Pottsville was infringing on their territorial rights and would be drawing away attendance from their own game, scheduled around the same time. So they complained to the league commissioner. Frankfurt was also extra salty because they had originally planned on playing Notre Dame earlier that season when it looked like they would be the champion. But those plans would be thwarted by the Maroons' dominant end to the season. Ultimately, the NFL sided with Frankfurt in this case and repeatedly warned Pottsville that they would be suspended from the league and fined if they went ahead with the game. Now, the Maroons claim that they did actually get verbal permission from the league over the phone to play, but it's not really clear what all was said between the two parties or who they even talked to. Regardless, the Maroons felt they could not pass up this opportunity to play the game in a larger stadium, bringing in more fans and more money. So they went ahead with the game. They won it too, which was quite an impressive feat at that time, although they didn't draw quite the large crowd they were hoping for. That was overshadowed though by the problem now facing Pottsville, because as promised, the Maroons would be suspended from the NFL, meaning they were now ineligible to receive the championship. They were also prohibited from playing their remaining scheduled game against the NFL's Providence Steamroller, with the Yellow Jackets actually sneaking in and taking their spot. Meanwhile, the Chicago Cardinals, who were the second best team that year, hastily scrambled together 2 more games to play against 2 teams that had already disbanded for the season. One of these would have a pretty significant controversy of its own, as a Cardinals player would hire high school players to suit up under aliases for the opposing team, the Milwaukee Badgers. This allowed the Badgers to fill out their depleted, disbanded roster, and for the Cardinals to get an easy win, which they did, 58-0. With their 2 victories to close out the season, and with Pottsville's suspension, the Chicago Cardinals now had the best record in the NFL. Obviously though, they had violated league rules by hiring amateur players to play against. When the NFL found out about this soon after, they made the Badgers owner sell his team. But for the Cardinals, other than the player that hired them, who was banned, they got off pretty easy. The Cardinals owner, Chris O'Brien, claimed he did not know about the scheme, and it seemed like everyone was in agreement that the game would be stricken from the records. However, the NFL just never did this. In fact, that game is still a part of the official records. So in a controversial move, the Chicago Cardinals would be awarded the 1925 NFL Championship over the Pottsville Maroons. Many have questioned how the league could strip the title from Pottsville for violating league rules, yet award it to the Cardinals, who also violated the rules, in probably a much worse way to be honest, as they actually cheated. But it seems the NFL president, Joseph Carr, was more spiteful towards the Maroons because they directly defied him. For what it's worth, the Cardinals refused to accept the championship. In fact, it seems their late season scramble to add more winnable games wasn't in an effort to overtake Pottsville in the standings, but rather to entice the Chicago Bears to play them one more time, who were a lucrative draw with some star power. The Cardinals owner felt it wasn't right for them to claim the championship over a team that had rightfully beaten them. However, the Cardinals were sold to Charles Bidwell in 1933, the same Bidwell family that still owns them to this day, and he had a much different view of that 1925 championship than O'Brien did. They began to claim the title, and to this day, the Cardinals are officially considered the 1925 NFL champions. As for the Pottsville Maroons, they would be reinstated the following season and finish 3rd in the standings that year. Unfortunately, the next couple seasons would be lackluster ones, and they would move to Boston for 1 year to play as the Bulldogs, before disbanding completely. A team that is now mostly forgotten to NFL history, save for that 1925 season and a supposed curse placed by the residents of Pottsville on the Cardinals franchise. You may know that the Cardinals are the oldest football club in the NFL, yet they are historically one of the worst when it comes to postseason success. This has led many to believe the team is cursed, and there seems to be a pretty strong case for it, as punishment for stealing and falsely claiming a title that rightfully belonged to Pottsville. The curse of the Maroons will not allow the Cardinals to win another championship. Indeed, the Cardinals have not won a Super Bowl, and aside from that 1925 championship, they only have one other NFL championship in 1947. Now you might say that that alone makes the curse invalid, but there's something odd with it too. In a cruel twist of fate, 1947 would be the season right after Charles Bidwell passed away, the same owner that initially began to wrongfully claim the 1925 chip. So this means that he died a year before his team won one of its own, which seems a bit spiteful. In any case, that was the last time the Cardinals won a championship of any kind, and currently they have the longest drought in the NFL at 76 seasons. Now each time the topic of giving the championship back to Pottsville has come up for discussion amongst the NFL and the owners, it's always ended up being decided to stay with the original decision that the championship belongs to the Cardinals, with really only the Pennsylvania teams, the Pittsburgh Steelers and Philadelphia Eagles, arguing against that notion. So until everyone wises up and just returns the championship to Pottsville, the curse will remain in effect. I mean, that championship means way more to the people of Pottsville than it does to Cardinals fans, and until they get what's rightfully theirs, the city will continue to place its hexes on the hated Redbirds, ensuring their prolonged suffering. Now I've been to Pottsville, huge fan of Yingling, but let's just say that the city could use a win, especially a championship. I'm willing to bet most Cardinals fans don't even know about this, and those that do you even give a shit about a century-old championship, or would you rather be able to compete for a Super Bowl now? Cause I'll tell you, Pottsville remembers, and as long as you falsely claim what doesn't belong to you, they'll make sure you never get one that rightfully does. I think this is one of the most powerful and ancient curses in the NFL, and it's probably my favorite given the amount of lore behind it. This is a top tier curse, and Cardinals fans, I don't know if God hates you, but Pottsville certainly does. The FedEx Hex is a nasty little curse that is extremely rare, but when the stars align for it, it can be quite devastating. I'm of course talking about the uncanny string of injuries that occurred on the field, most notably the gruesome injury suffered by quarterback Alex Smith. Smith's injury infamously shared some eerie resemblance to that of another Washington quarterback, Joe Theismann. The similarities between the injuries are a bit disturbing. Both quarterbacks played for the Washington Redskins. Both broke their right tibia and fibula. Both injuries occurred on November 18th, 33 years apart to the day, in games played in Washington and around the 39-yard line. Both quarterbacks had lost their Pro Bowl left tackles to injuries that game, Joe Jacoby and Trent Williams. Both were injured by three-time Defensive Player of the Year winners Lawrence Taylor and J.J. Watt, and both games ended up with a final score of 23-21. Apparently Joe Theismann was also in attendance the day of Alex Smith's injury. That is one very unsettling coincidence. Now it should be noted that while Theismann's injury did occur in Washington, it was actually not at FedEx Field, which is in Landover, Maryland anyway, but RFK Stadium, so it doesn't line up perfectly with our potential curse. However, FedEx Field has seen its share of unfortunate injuries, such as RG3 tearing his ACL, and in one of the more unusual accidents, Jalen Hurts was almost crushed while exiting the field. Fans have also had raw sewage poured on them, so I don't think the stadium is as cursed as much as it just sucks. Gruesome injuries happen in every stadium, but even more so when the field is shit, like MetLife Stadium, or I guess, FedEx. Now you could argue Washington may be cursed, perhaps a Native American tribe cursed them, but considering they dropped the name Redskins, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that, I'd say their misfortune is more so the result of mismanagement, ownership, and bad luck. The injuries to Al Smitty and almost Heisman Theismann are uncanny, but it's more like an extreme freak event rather than a proper curse. So I don't think FedEx Field is hexed, it just sucks. The Minnesota Vikings have a lot of curses to deal with. The kicker position seems cursed. The 27-yard line also seems cursed. We could go on all day. So instead, we'll just lump them all together, as I believe they all stem from the fact that the entire franchise is cursed. Hell, it's not even a curse at this point. It's just complete damnation. Where do I even start with this team? Minnesota is a very unique franchise. What separates the Vikings from the NFL's bottom dwellers is that they are very rarely necessarily actually a bad team. They have fielded some of the best talents the league has seen, with the likes of Adrian Peterson, Randy Moss, John Randall, Alan Page, the boy Jared Allen, and many more Hall of Famers. Consistent quarterback play has been a long-term issue for the team, outside of the great Fran Tarkenton, who played 50 years ago, Kirk Cousins, who has a curse of his own, and a few random seasons from the likes of Dante Culpepper, Randall Cunningham, and Brett Fuck It and Chuck It Favre. Quarterback has been rather lackluster for decades, but otherwise a lot of talent has passed through the Twin Cities. Minnesota is a winning franchise, with an all-time record of 523 wins, 435 losses, and 11 ties, the best without a Super Bowl. Their winning percentage of .546 is 8th of all time, beating out the likes of the 49ers, Steelers, and more. They are also one of only 4 teams to appear in a conference championship every decade since the 70s. That level of consistency is something rarely seen, and makes the lack of a Super Bowl all the more curious. But if we momentarily remove the postseason from the conversation, the Vikings are potentially a top 10 NFL franchise. In fact, they might even be considered something of a storied one, with a long history, rich traditions, and iconic players. The Vikings can't even blame ownership like some other alleged cursed teams can, as the Wolves are seen by most as being competent owners that don't get in the way of coaching and strive to put their teams in a favorable position to succeed. And as such, the Vikings are a team that players want to play for. Last season they ranked first in the off-season report card, a player poll that ranks teams by things such as team facilities, locker rooms, nutrition and strength plans, as well as treatment of families. Basically, they treat their players well. Really, the only thing holding Minnesota back as a franchise is a lack of postseason success. It's here where the Vikings have routinely fallen apart and disappointed. Just as they are consistent in making the playoffs, they are consistent in finding ways to be eliminated from them. Despite being a relatively recent franchise at the time, beginning play in 1961, the first 2 decades of Vikings football would be some of their best, as the team reached 4 Super Bowls in 69, nice, 73, 74, and 76, losing all of them, as unfortunately they were outmatched by their AFC opponents each time. But don't worry, the Vikings have not lost a Super Bowl since, because they have not played in a Super Bowl since in 47 years. Oh, but they have been close. We'll come back to the first Super Bowl in a moment when we're searching for the origin of the curse, but for now I'd like to punish myself by looking at all the tragic instances of playoff failure due to the curse. You ever wondered where the Hail Mary pass came from? Probably not, but yeah, the Vikings are on the losing end of that play's origin story, at least the one that made it widespread in the NFL. Like I said a moment ago, the Vikes reached the Super Bowl in 73, 74, and 76. So what happened in 75 that kept them from 4 straight Super Bowl appearances? And if we're being honest, probably pulling a Bills and losing all 4 straight. Well, the 1975 divisional round happened. Down by 4 with 24 seconds left, Cowboys quarterback Roger Staubach threw a 50-yard game-winning touchdown pass, saying afterwards, "I closed my eyes and said a Hail Mary." And it's not surprising that God answered his prayer to screw over Minnesota, making the refs blind to offensive pass interference that had occurred. Angry at this and other missed calls on that game-winning drive, Vikings fans began to throw shit onto the field at the refs. One fan, who had managed to sneak in a bottle of whiskey, threw it and struck referee Armin Terzian, I think that's how you say it, in the head, knocking him unconscious for a moment and leaving a large gash on his forehead. But he would be able to walk off the field and soon recover. This referee, though, became known for missed calls that had direct impacts on the results of games. After one incident where he mistakenly let a touchback be called a safety, he was suspended by the NFL and ultimately resigned from officiating. Now, I have seen it suggested that this is the origin of the curse, and this guy would actually go on to ref the Vikings in the Super Bowl the next year. However, I think the curse began before this, and this is just a symptom of that, and also an example of the refs dicking over Minnesota. Back to the 1975 game though. To make it even worse, quarterback Fran Tarkenton was informed afterwards that his father had quite literally passed away from a heart attack while watching the game from home. All this turned a game that should have been a celebrated win into one of the darkest and most notorious moments in Vikings history. At least the Cowgirls did lose in the Super Bowl. Let's skip through the Super Bowls, as they were very clearly outmatched in them, and fast forward to 1998, when the Vikings fielded perhaps their best team ever. Randall Cunningham led the league with a 106 passer rating, his top duo of wide receivers, Hall of Famers Chris Carter and Randy Moss, the latter of which was a rookie and scored a record 17 touchdowns. The offense was arguably the best the NFL had ever seen up until that time, scoring 556 points. The defense was dominant too, anchored by the great John Randall. Oh, but let's not forget kicker Gary Anderson. No, let's not forget him. Anderson finished the regular season with the greatest kicking season in NFL history, being the first ever to convert every field goal and every extra point attempt, as well as setting an NFL record for points scored. He was perfect. Money. Anderson and the Vikings remained perfect in a divisional round win against the Cardinals, but it's in the NFC Championship game against the Atlanta Falcons the following week where the curse would strike. Just over 2 minutes left, the Vikings are in position to kick a 39-yard field goal, which would give them a 10-point lead and likely seal the game. Instead, as we mentioned earlier, the announcer's jinx would occur, and Gary Anderson would miss his first kick of the season. This is arguably the most infamous example of the announcer's jinx, as well as one of the worst moments in Vikings history, and the kicker position for Minnesota has not quite been the same since. Anyways, this gave the Falcons the ball back with a chance to tie the game, and after the Vikings dropped an interception, the Falcons would score the game-tying touchdown on the following play. Minnesota got the ball first in overtime, but were forced to punt to Atlanta, and the two would exchange a couple punts until the Falcons marched down the field to set up their own Anderson, Morton Anderson, for the game-winning kick. That 15-1 Vikings team was the first 15-1 team to miss the Super Bowl, and is not only considered by many to be the best Vikings team, but the best team to not make it to the Super Bowl. You gotta really mess things up to choke to the Falcons of all teams. At least the Falcons did lose the Super Bowl. Alright, let's just skip the early 2000s, nothing to see here. 2009, led by a resurgent Brett Favre and a young Adrian Peterson, the Vikings were one of the best teams in the league, reaching the NFC Championship. Yeah, this is the Bountygate game, where the Saints bloodied Brett Favre with 30 hits as the refs looked on in sheer delight. Even still, the Vikings didn't do themselves any favors this game. They turned the ball over 5 times, including this just atrocious attempt by Favre that ended up sending the game into overtime, which they would ultimately lose. The play right before that, they got called for too many men on the field, knocking them out of field goal range, where they could have attempted the game-winning field goal. Well, at least the Aints did lose the Super... God damn it! There's also the 2015 playoff game, the Blair Walsh game. You may not remember it, but Blair Walsh was an extremely promising young kicker who led the NFL and made field goals that year. In a painful-to-watch, low-scoring affair against the Seahawks in the wildcard round, Walsh was the only Viking to score, nailing 3 field goals. He was then set up to kick the game-winning field goal, a 27-yarder, but perhaps jinxed, he shanked it. The promising young kicker was never the same, and out of the league just 2 years later. Now, there have been moments of miracles, such as the greatest play in Vikings history, the Minneapolis Miracle. But these are overshadowed by the abundance of tragedy. After all, the following game after the miracle was the NFC Championship game, where the Vikings got blown out by the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles. Oh, by the way, the Super Bowl was hosted in Minnesota that year, but that's its own curse we'll get to later. So what is this curse that plagues the Minnesota Vikings? Obviously there's something here, but what exactly? The most commonly proposed origin involves the Ed Thorpe Trophy, which was awarded to the winner of the NFL Championship from 1934 to 1969, in the pre-Super Bowl era. The trophy was named after a referee, so it wouldn't be the only time a ref screwed over the Vikings. Now, unlike the Lombardi Trophy, which would replace it, the Ed Thorpe was not an individual trophy made each year for the winner. Instead, it was a single trophy that was passed around each year, similar to the Stanley Cup, as it also had each champion's name engraved onto it. After the beginning of the Super Bowl era, the Lombardi Trophy would come to replace the Ed Thorpe as the most prestigious championship trophy in football. However, the first few Super Bowls were still technically before the NFL-AFL merger, so as independent leagues, the Ed Thorpe was still given to the NFL champion before the Super Bowl against the AFL champion. At least that's what was thought. However, around that time, people weren't too sure about its whereabouts, and there would come to be a mystery surrounding the Ed Thorpe because it went missing. The blame fell upon the Vikings, who were believed to have been the last team to win the trophy in '69. Right before the merger the following season. The Vikings had been the NFL champion that year, thus technically earning the Ed Thorpe, although they would lose the Super Bowl, their first of 4. With it being believed that the Vikings lost the trophy, the story was that the spirit of Ed Thorpe had cursed them to never possess another championship trophy, as they were unworthy of handling it, and for decades this seemed like a likely scenario that perfectly explained the Vikings curse, which seemed to have begun around that time. Many Vikings fans believed that the trophy just needed to be found in order to lift the curse. And in 2015, the Ed Thorpe Memorial Trophy was finally found. However, it was also revealed that the whole legend surrounding it was likely not true at all. Turns out the trophy had been in the Packers' possession the entire time, being discovered in the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame, alongside 2 replicas. Of course, it's the goddamn Packers. Now, I wish I could say it was that simple, and the curse was lifted, that the Packers had cursed us, and ironically uncursed us. However, interestingly enough, it was revealed that the trophy was not passed around until 1969 as originally thought, but only until 1967, a year the Packers won. This means that the 1968 Colts, and of course the 1969 Vikings, never even received the trophy, and indeed their names are not carved onto it. The scumbag Packers just simply never gave the trophy up. Now Green Bay had won the trophy the previous 2 years as well, meaning it had been in their possession for at least 3 straight years, a streak that also included the first 2 Super Bowls, where the NFL champion would face off against the AFL champion, with what would later be called the Lombardi Trophy being awarded to the winning team. So with the Ed Thorpe Trophy no longer being the premier trophy, especially a couple years later when the NFL and AFL would officially merge into one league, it seems it was mostly forgotten about, something I imagine the greedy Packers took advantage of in order to keep the trophy for themselves. To be clear, I don't mind the Packers holding on to the trophy. They did win it more than anyone else, so I think they do have a claim to it, but they didn't have to be such dicks about it. I wish that was the end of it for the Vikings. The trophy was found safe and sound, and thus the curse was lifted. But with the Vikings never receiving the trophy, and therefore not the ones to lose it, it seems this is not the curse we're looking for. Now you might argue that the curse won't be broken until their name is engraved onto the trophy, but I disagree with this theory for a couple reasons. Even if we restrict the names to the pre-NFL-AFL merger, the Vikings aren't the only missing name. The Colts aren't engraved either from the year before, and have won 2 Super Bowls since. The 1960 Philadelphia Eagles are also missing, and although they seemed cursed for a while, that seems to be for different reasons we'll discuss later, but regardless, have won a Super Bowl since. I'd also point out that for the last couple years of the trophy, it was treated as something more akin to the modern George Halas Trophy, awarded to the winner of the NFC Championship. Given all that, I personally believe the Ed Thorpe Trophy curse to be a red herring. Instead, I think the true Vikings curse is something much worse. It's something unknown. The only thing that's known about it is that it dates back to the early days of the franchise, potentially before 1969. At least with the Pottsville Curse on the Cardinals, it's clear how to break it, just return the damn trophy. But if you don't know why you're cursed, then how the hell are you supposed to know how to break it? I have very little clue as to what cursed the Vikings, and what needs to be done to remedy it, which is about the worst place a team can find themselves. As we continue to make our way through this list, we'll discuss the NFL's other cursed franchises, but as you'll find out, they all have a pretty clear reason for being cursed, and therefore a hopeful way to lift it. The Vikings are the only franchise without that luxury, and therefore are the NFL's most cursed. Whatever plagues Minnesota belongs in the top tier, as the pinnacle of NFL curses, as God hates them. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's a Packers fan. Maybe that's the problem. The Sports Illustrated cover jinx is similar to the Madden Curse, however it is not exclusive to football, as it is said to affect any athlete that should appear on the cover, and it dates back much earlier. Now I didn't realize how deep this one ran, but it has a pretty long list of victims, and the curse can be particularly gruesome, ranging from just losing a match to suffering life-threatening injuries. One of the earliest and most well-known examples is with alpine skier Jill Kinmont, who was featured on the cover of the January 31st, 1955 issue. At only 18 years old, Kinmont had a bright future and seemed destined to represent the US at the Winter Olympics. However, unfortunately, just days after appearing on the cover, Kinmont would be involved in a near-fatal accident when she lost control during a race and struck a tree, tragically resulting in her being paralyzed from the shoulders down. Thankfully, Kinmont didn't let this destroy her life, as she made the most of what she had, even regaining the use of her hands, having a long career in education, getting married, and living to be 75. Her story was the basis of the 1975 film, The Other Side of the Mountain. The Sports Illustrated cover jinx has persisted into the modern day, and doesn't exclude any athlete or sport. It is infamous enough that some athletes have apparently refused to appear on the cover out of fear of being cursed. Now the jinx is a pretty deep rabbit hole to go down, and since we're focusing on NFL curses today, we won't be doing that. Instead, we'll stick to the football aspect of it. One of the more recent NFL incidents was in 2017, when Aaron Rodgers, JJ Watt, and David Johnson appeared on the cover, and each suffered what ended up being season-ending injuries. Cam Newton appeared right before losing the Super Bowl, Mark Sanchez right before losing the AFC Championship. There was also Ryan Leaf, and well, you know how that went. There was Brett Favre right before losing the NFC Championship, Adrian Peterson right before Blair Walsh missed that chip shot game-winning field goal, although those last two might just be the Vikings curse. I would like to point out though, for that last one, Blair Walsh was dealing with potentially 4 curses: the Vikings curse, the Sports Illustrated jinx, the Vikings kicker curse, and the announcer's jinx. Poor guy never stood a chance. Like the Madden Curse, there are exceptions to the Sports Illustrated jinx, those who appeared on the cover yet did not suffer misfortune as a result. One of the more notable NFL examples is Emmitt Smith, appearing on the cover the same week as Super Bowl 28, which Smith and the Cowboys ended up winning against the Bills. Perhaps that's more so a testament to the strength of the Bills' own curse, however, as it would be 2 curses facing off of that game. Apparently, Emmitt Smith even wanted off of that cover out of fear for the jinx. The Sports Illustrated cover jinx is something of an urban legend in the sports world, and is a bit unpredictable, as it seems sporadic in who it actually affects. One common explanation often made is that the athletes are appearing at the peaks of their careers, and therefore only have one direction to go: down. I don't know, this one is very broad with a long history, and covers a lot of sports and athletes. I think I'm going to put it as an easy one to break, but on the higher end. Bountygate Karma refers to the string of bad luck in the playoffs the New Orleans Saints have endured since their 2009 Super Bowl run. The victory coincided with the infamous Bountygate scandal, where hits were put out on opposing teams' players, and Saints defenders were paid out bonuses to inflict injuries. They were definitely scummy, and some feel the scandal puts an asterisk on that Super Bowl win. Not me, of course, with the Saints essentially being rewarded for their dirty play, especially since at the time it was occurring, the refs turned a blind eye. There is a theory that the NFL wanted New Orleans to win the Super Bowl after Hurricane Katrina, to boost morale during the recovery effort, but the Super Bowl would be like 5 years after Katrina hit, so I'll let you decide on that or not. Regardless, the Super Bowl meant a lot to the city that was still trying to recover from the devastating event. However, since that Super Bowl, the Saints have really struggled in the playoffs, but their losses are often in part due to a random freak play that doesn't go in their favor, prompting some to believe their misfortune is karma for Bountygate, or a result of them selling their soul for a Super Bowl. A year after winning Super Bowl 44, the Beastquake would happen.
Oh, look at this run! Marshawn Lynch still on his feet. He has blockers now. He's dancing his way for the touchdown.
There was also my favorite play of all time. Let's go ahead and show it again.
This is caught! Jinx! Sideline! Touchdown! Unbelievable! Vikings win it!
And of course, the infamous no law, no call, a missed pass interference that had Saints fans pissing themselves with anger. There are more examples you could add to this list, but you get the idea. Drew Brees never made it back to the Super Bowl, and with his and Sean Payton's departure, that era of Saints football is over, and they are currently in a pretty mediocre state. Now, one might argue that the team called the Saints ironically sold their soul for a Super Bowl, and the devil is collecting his dues. It does seem like karma is taking its revenge on New Orleans, but at the end of the day, they still got their Super Bowl. Most teams suffering from curses can't say that, and I doubt Saints fans would trade that. And as a result, I don't know how much stock I can put into it, at least in the short term. This is one to keep an eye on. I want to see this one play out more in the long term, before I consider it a hard one to break. But I think you can make that argument. You know what? I changed my mind. I think it's a pretty strong one. So that's going to do it for part 1. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, stay tuned for episode 2 to see the next part of the list. Let me know how you would have ranked these curses and which ones you were looking forward to hearing next. Until next time, stay nifty. Yeah, man!